Welcome to the Soilcraft Regen Agronomy Podcast. At Soilcraft, our mission is to innovate and lead in the field of regenerative agronomy, forging a path that empowers farmers to produce food that nourishes and heals both the planet and its inhabitants. So here we are starting our podcast, and I'm not sure how we'll release this, to be honest, because we had a very, several episodes that were very similar in approach. But then we've since had departures to that just because we want to capture just whatever it is we're doing or wherever we are. So here we are at our Soilcraft Conference here in 2025, and I'm sitting down with Trent Graybill and with the mighty Matt Powers, who we're so stoked has been able to join us. So thanks for joining us for this podcast. This is going to be a bit of an off-the-cuff podcast, and it's based on opportunity. Because we're here, because Matt's here, we have an opportunity to sit down and have a conversation. Matt, I came across you, I think it's only been maybe at most 2 years ago, and what you're doing. And it was first by a reference, just some casual reference from someone to your book, and I was like, what? I know a lot of books in the regenerative space. How have I missed this one? So I Googled it, go on Amazon, and I'm like, whoa, what is this? And so immediately I'm like, okay, I've got to get this. This is amazing. And after getting it and starting to look through it and learn more about what you're doing, I've been just I felt blessed by it, to be honest. And I think I speak for a lot of people that you are a blessing to this space, and you blessed me, and you're blessing a lot of people. And you have a profound gift, and I think it's really great that you talk about yourself. You're an educator. You're like, this is who I am. This is what I do. And this is the space I'm in. And you're educating us. But to be able, for those of you that don't know Matt's book, Regenerative Soil, we have a copy here. And maybe the one which we're out of, unfortunately, is Regenerative Microscopy, which I'm just so stoked, because I really think what I love about your approach is it's principled in nature, which that's how we try to do everything at Soilcraft, is principled in nature. And it's approachable by beginners, and yet the depth of research and not just the depth of research, but also of the practical component. You've found a way to marry these and make these things that can, in this time, can seem a bit heady, and bring them down to just where we can all get something from it, whether you're new to the space or you've been doing it a long time and you're really into the technical aspect. It's very useful for all of us. And I think, in fact, I might say, I think it's transformative in a time when we need transformation. My son, who's joining us now, who's helping run the media and do the media, is getting ready to go through the course. One of my interns that's going to start with me in February in Zambia, who just graduated from his secondary school there and getting ready, taking a gap year, I'm going to put through your course before he goes on to get his bachelor's degree, because I think it's that important. Thank you. So, that's where we are. That's where I am.
I appreciate it.
With your work. And so just thank you. I just want to say thank you. And more than anything, thank you for, I think what you're driving at is kind of the spirit of it is really both giving all that you are into what you're doing, and then doing your very best to, obviously you have to find ways to make money. We got to pay bills, but to give the most value you possibly can to the most people. And that's something that we all wrestle with. And I really think it talks about that scarcity versus abundance worldview. That would be, but anyways, okay, so here we are, and I'm talking too much, but I'm just jazzed, and I can't wait to get one of your fluorescence microscopes to Zambia so we can actually start measuring our roots and measuring our soils and measuring. I just got a basic microscope over there right now that I'm using, and I need to up my game. But I'm only one person, and we talked about that earlier about collaboration, and so that's what I'm counting on. I'm handing the baton. I'm doing my role, but now my son Gabriel and Matthews, who's going to be joining us, I'm like, all right, guys, I'm equipping you. Get ready. You're going to take this, and now you're bringing this. You're going to bring this into our enterprise, if you will, and trusting them to say, look, I can't be an expert in everything. I want you to become an expert in this and bring this to us. So that's where we are. That's what we're doing. But what I wanted to talk to you a bit, Matt, is for one, I really like hearing people's story, and that can take ages. But it's my favorite thing to do when you probably observed it many times. We show up to a new farmer or something like that, and I'm just like, how did you get here? Where did you come from? How did this farm emerge? And so if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to take a minute to just get at the story, and it could be as brief as you want. But the Matt Powers we see today, who's written not only these books but countless works in permaculture and music, who's an author in many spaces and an educator. How did you find, what I'm really fascinated to find out is, because you've been a professional musician, you've been in permaculture, what brought you into the space of agriculture at what age? And that what led you to find yourself, not just from familiar or from past or whatever, to become, career-based, a profession in agriculture. Does that make sense, or do you want any more?
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. I fell into this totally unintentionally, and I feel gratitude every day and really count it as one of the greatest blessings of my life that I could be in a position to serve people, whether they're a gardener, whether they're just learning about how to do things properly with soil, or whether there's someone restoring landscape, remediating soil that's poisoned, or a large-scale farmer that's trying to transition or do things better. And it's a pretty wild place to have arrived. It's wild because I don't have a farm.
Yeah, right.
I've got like a garden that I made very large, and then made so large that it was hard to like balance life at some times and balance my health at times and manage alone. And I've actually learned a lot of things by having to manage things more like a large scale farmer, because I'm at that teetering point where, I can't manage it. I can't weed it all by hand. It's 2 acres and I'm doing it alone. And so I had to like rethink the way I did things in a lot of ways. And it just became really apparent, that the way I've been doing things, has been trying to understand all these different perspectives. Mm-hmm. And so everything I do flows through an educational perspective. The mistakes I've made, the lessons I've learned. Mm-hmm. And it's just an absolute honor to be here at that final point. But I should start at the beginning. So I always wanted to be a musician. I only wanted to be a musician, but I grew up skiing and ski racing, and I was never as good as my brothers, so I never thought of myself as professionally becoming a ski racer. My only hope was as a J3 second year, when I'm big enough and weigh enough, that I could get into Junior Olympics. That was the only hope. That was the only aspiration, to match my brothers. I had knee surgery at age 15, and I started doing music like full-time as my focus as I was recovering. And by the time I was 18 in New York City, I was playing with professionals. And I basically applied all the things I had learned about high performance, about visualizing, about hard work, because it was always physical. And then bass is very physical. And so I just applied that to that, and then did music. And when my wife got cancer the first time, I had recently stopped drinking, and so touring wasn't as fun. And it was such a stressful time period that I really couldn't enjoy things the same way. Mm-hmm. And we had a newborn child. I might lose my wife. I'd be like a single dad with a newborn baby. Like, what? I'm not prepared for that. Yeah. She was like excited to be the mom. I'm excited to be the dad, but I can't. I'm 24, And so it was I think maybe I was 25. It was 17 years ago. But there was lead up. We were trying to figure out what it was. And then they were doing a biopsy, and they found the cancer. And so I started worrying about health in a very serious way right then. And I started teaching at a local music private school. And I had autistic students that struggled, and I wanted to keep them as clients. And so I started creating curriculum, and then I realized I could create a book. And I was a writer, and I went to NYU to be a writer. And I loved writing. I started writing books in high school. Fantasy and science fiction. Nothing groundbreaking. Yeah. And so it was, and I never finished anything. started, you may know people like this. They start a book and never finish it. I'm still working on the book, Bob. Yeah. And so I was just an author, and there's so many authors that are like writer, I should say. It wasn't even an author at that point, right? And then I tried to be a science fiction author and writer, and I sent my stuff out to all these different places, and ultimately was a failure. Wrote a lot of books. One of my books was over 300 pages. And you can actually still find those things online if you look hard enough. And meanwhile, my wife kept getting cancer. And so we started focusing harder and harder on health, trying to figure out like what we had control of, and it was the food. And then we moved away from my mom's house because we were covered at my mom's house. I went from a bass player who felt like he was on top of the world, renting a 2-story apartment in Brooklyn, playing bass and working coat check at nightclubs with my good friend, just when I wanted to. And half the time I'd show up at the nightclub and he'd just plug in the bass and be like, just play bass, man. And I'd just hang out and he'd still pay me. And I'd be like, what? So I lived a very, very blessed life, like extraordinarily blessed life. When I lost the ability to ski like I used to, I was very hard. When my wife almost died, that was very hard. And cancer kept coming back. It was just devastating. But every time we got through it, it just was this like renewal of my faith, renewal of, really a broken heart. And so I was always softened, and we pray still as a family, before every meal, before we go to bed. And it's a really meaningful part of my life. But that time period really made that indelible. And we did the Gerson therapy. I started going to debt, paying for like organic food. Don't do this. I mean, if you got to do it, you got to do it, I guess. But make it regenerative and pasture-raised, please. And this is before I went to the actual provider of that food and saw that their soil was terrible. And then I was like, honey, I think I can do this better than them. Literally, this is what happened. And you laugh because you know it's true.
Yeah, that's where we're laughing.
The organic farmers till their soils to death instead of using herbicides. You know what I mean? And so, and it's like a bad word now among farmers. And so I started trying to grow myself. And then the first year growing below Yosemite, which, we got everything. We got bobcats bigger than your dog. We got mountain lions everywhere that are like, big. Yeah. And then we've got bear and we've got all sorts of things, and everyone's gardens were just decimated regularly by deer and other things. Chickens. I had a bobcat kill 40 chickens in 2 nights.
40?
Yeah. It was just doing it. It was just getting into a frenzy.
Yeah. So
that, those kinds of experiences made everyone think I was foolish for trying to garden, but I was running out of like credit, and so I was tapping out the credit cards, and I was working as a substitute teacher at this point because I couldn't drive the 4 hours down to LA and work as a musician. So we're above Fresno, below Yosemite in the foothills, pretty wild. And it's the best place to raise children, I know they're purposely drying it out, and so it was like a tinder box. That's not the good part about it.
Sure.
But having the wilderness backdrop there was the best. And so we have our kids there. We're living with her parents and her grandparents. And so my boys are raised for 9 years with their great-grandparents. And so that was a huge blessing. And so I just see these things, these challenges in retrospect. At the time, there was times I was very bitter for a while. I was very angry because she got cancer. They took out her thyroid. They did the radiation, and 3 months later, she got more cancer. And a month later, she got more cancer. And it almost reached her lymph nodes, melanoma that almost reached the lymph nodes, and they had to operate to take it out. And so it was devastating. And when I asked them about it, they couldn't look me in the eye. And then when I asked when it was safe for James to be around her, I got I think it was like 1 or 2 months, and then it was like 3 months, and then it was like 6 months. And I was like, whoa. It was 3 totally different answers from 3 doctors. Wow. And I realized they have no idea what they're talking about. those are the times where like my energy would like emanate out of me, and like I wouldn't do anything, but I would be so upset. Those are the kind of times where my wife would be like, you shouldn't come any longer. And I was a young dad, and I wanted more children. We wanted more children. And so there was no literature about whether we could have another child without a thyroid in the mother. And so we tried, and it was multiple pregnancies, and we were able to have all of, but she kept getting cancer. Yeah. And so I kept doubling down and trying to go bigger and bigger and figure this out. And then permaculture really appealed to me because of the principles aspect and the scientific like pillars, and the principles perspective, and the following natural cycles, and the ethics. The extrapolations, which is the methods, those are always questionable, right? Because is it going to work perfectly for me the way you did it? You might need to adapt it following the principles and the cycles of the bioregion and this climate that you live in. You know, so it goes back to permaculture again. But people go in permaculture get caught up in methods.
Yeah.
But it's not that at all. It's a mindset, a lens for making decisions. And so for me, it was brilliant. And so I was like able to then adapt impossible Peruvian corn from the highland valleys of Peru, like 9,000 feet. This corn, I was able to bring it down 2,000 feet because it was photoperiodic. Like the amount of light that it got determined like its growth pattern. And so I realized that it was probably joules. Right? It's probably actually a raw energy. So what if we diffuse the energy and we shaded it? So I got like a 16 to 20 foot tall, corn plant because it's freaking out because it's moved 6 to 7,000 feet like lower, right? And it can't handle its water. So it's this giant thing, and it makes a crown on top of corn on one of them. Yep. The tassels and the corn and all of it was in one spot because it was going back in time.
What?
It's going back to an earlier manifestation of its genes.
Gee.
So it was super cool. It was amazing. And I was able to get full corn ears, but not lengthened like ones like all North America. I was able to get the grenades, the grenade shapes of the earlier corn types that are still grown in Peru.
Yeah.
And so I was able to do things that started turning heads, and then people started generational farmers began to visit my garden. And then like I would like do things that I'd be like, oh, well, I made this swale, and this is like the path put on top mixed with compost, but there's real soil under like the original soil underneath, not just this like combination. And let me dig down. So I'm digging down, and they're watching me. I'm digging down, and I'm like, where's the line? And I went to my shoulder. And obviously the swale had like 1.5 feet of soil on top, right? That I added. But because of the action of the microbes, I did, all right, if you go watch the videos, I'm there doing compost tea, but I was putting water kefir grains in the compost and in the compost tea. So I was doing basically a primitive, and so it makes sense because it would have been much more acidic than normal compost. Because of that, it melted the soil, and there was no line, and they were freaking out. And I was like, okay, well, that's how it works. That's how it works with the system I do. Cool. And they were like, cool.
Yeah.
Right. I've been doing this 30 years, man. That's cool. They were freaked out. And they all like, some people suspected I was like doing things. And then they met me and they're like, there's no way that guy's smart enough to be doing things. Right. Right. And so I was a bass player, you know what I mean? I was following, Jeff Lawton and Elaine Ingham and Sepp Holzer and Masanobu Fukuoka, and then the principles. And so I would take heirloom seeds, and I studied heirloom seeds, and I'd throw them on the ground, and then because I knew we're training the epigenetics, and then I would save the ones that grew and then plant them, and then all of them grew when I throw through them. So I was doing things that like was in the literature, our leaders were doing, but no one was actually doing, and no one was actually combined. Like my whole thing is, it's like, there's only 3 ways to think. You can copy another idea. You can take an idea, take it from one context and put into another. That's remix or translation. Or you can combine ideas. That's mashup. Those are the 3 human modalities, right? And then you could argue that there's a 4th, inspiration. But I knew that, and I'm really good at mashing up things. And so I just like see all these combinations and I mash things up and I'm like, well, and a part of it was like, I did fall for that whole paradigm early on. Like, how do we do everything all at once? How do we make a silver bullet made with multiple rainbow colors? You know what I mean? And like combine everything into one thing. That's kind of what I did in verse with my work is I eventually was like, all right, okay, there's not a silver bullet, but all these things are unified concepts. Soil is a unified concept that is comprised of biology, minerals, water, air, you know what I mean? Organic matter. And it's that combination of these things that makes the gestalt soil. So I was seeking it in my own way, but I had to do a lot of learning. And a lot of it was self-regulation and learning, and a lot of it was health. I had Crohn's. And so my diet has been this crazy pathway when I went raw vegan because I couldn't digest meat. I literally couldn't digest it. And then I went vegetarian because my teeth started falling out and falling apart. And then I went omnivore, and then I started feeling better. And then I became allergic to everything because I still had leaky gut. And so then I was like full carnivore, and that was the thing that healed it. But I'm getting a little bit ahead. That took me a long time to figure out. But so I started writing these books after I became a teacher. And I really wouldn't have done a good job of making any of these books unless I had been a teacher. My mom wrote the special ed curriculum for middle schoolers that was adopted into law and then adopted nationwide. In the 70s, before my mom, they didn't actually educate them. There was no curriculum. So they just kept special ed students in a room and treated them like they couldn't learn, which is painful. And my mom felt that pain. I feel that pain. And I'm like a Mr. Rogers generation, right? And so like I absolutely anyway, resonate with all that on that level of care. Neighborliness, that whole vibe. I love it. And so my mom, she saw that, created the curriculum, proved it. They taught it back to her at Columbia, and she eventually became a local politician in Connecticut, and then became the third in power in the minority house leader, vice minority house leader in House of Representatives in Connecticut.
Oh, wow.
So I saw her go across the board, work with people she didn't like, with people of the opposite party, and make like wetlands restored. So I grew up with this camp on this, Todd's Point in Connecticut, and they transformed this whole stinky, putrid, anaerobic wetland into like egrets and like oysters again. And it was beautiful. And I saw her transcend herself for the greater good and have this real change that on the surface, it's like a miracle. It's like, how do you like change like a pond?
Yeah.
Like a whole pond, that's a brackish pond mixture that goes in and out every day. And all, as a child, now I know what they did, but for me, it was profound, and those life lessons were embedded in me, I think, in some way. And so when I became a substitute teacher after my wife really kind of begged me to, so that we could get health care, I was one of those like permanent subs for the district so I could get health care. So I wasn't like a free roamer. I was like a credentialed one, so I was like the higher level ones. And so I was able to get healthcare, and I did that for 4 years, and I fell in love with teaching. And I then became a student teacher at a school with master teachers, and I was the baby of a charter school that had no books, had only laptops, and it was a Mac certified school. So I learned to teach all the kids the Mac apps. I learned how to operate all of the video, the audio. I taught a whole class on Logic. So I taught a music class on Logic, and I still use Logic today. And my son records with Logic in his studios and does albums with it. He started on Logic at age 8. So I was learning, and then I got all right. So I did my student teaching, and then I immediately continued. I went right into a master's degree program. And I was so into it that I went into my advisor and I lobbied the actual program to allow me to get my master's degree. Because I told them, I was like, I guarantee I'm your highest like scoring student here. I guarantee I'm your top student. It was a time period. I was a little cocky, I know, but I literally argued my way into getting my master's degree program married to my student teaching program in such a way that I got to skip tens of thousands of dollars because of the merit of what I was doing. And I was like basically saying like, I will prove out your program because of what I'm doing with it in real time in these classes with these computers. And they were like, okay. And so I got into all these classes because that's the thing. It's like, it's not about the piece of paper. Because actually, in California, they play so nice. You get, your master's degree, you get $1,000 more a year. And then somehow you lose your health care and it's $700 more a month. Huh? Who won that battle?
What?
I hate you, California. So it was really about the education. And it was there that I found the actual way to educate. The way they were training teachers in California is the opposite of what actual education is. And this level allowed me to start unschooling my son. And that's not no education.
Right.
Unschooling is I'm not schooling him to be part of a group or a fish group school, I want him to be a dynamic leader and someone who thinks critically
yeah.
and can also produce and work really hard and think really hard. And so that's a totally different education. That's a performative education. That's an authentic learning education. And that's you actually interviewing that child and getting them to tell you in such a way that you're like, yeah, they do understand it. Yeah, they got this.
Yeah.
And like, that's the real thing. And so I got that all in this master's degree program. And so much of the information in the real world is locked up and it's done that way so that the commercial entities can capitalize on it.
And you buy the keys if you're lucky enough. Yeah.
Right. And so the commercials entities dominate because they have access to they do this test themselves. So like, I could say this story. It's okay. So like, for instance, at Post cereal back in the late 80s, they figured out like, sugary cereals aren't causing cavities. It's actually our best seller, like grape nuts, because it's water insoluble, gets lodged in your teeth, and then causes the breakdown much faster. But sugary cereals are water soluble because it's just sugar. Yeah. And so it doesn't bother the teeth. And because of just the environment of and the reality of it, they just, kept that information to themselves. But that's the reality. It's like you have so many things that are just, we're not going to let the public know. And
can you imagine how many people are just chomping on grape nuts because they think that they have to, because they think that's the good thing, but it's actually causing cavities.
I know.
That just makes me sad.
Well, there's plenty of sad things I can bring up, but my point is that my point in all this is that we have to do the testing as citizen scientists. We have to do the testing ourselves. And as I did the work, I began to become more and more of an academic. I began to teach teachers. I had 150 students in my English course in 10th grade, and I had 150 different preps. So I individualized the education for the 150 kids so that I could prove that we could do unschooling in school. And
wow.
What you do is you create menus and you have open-ended reflective-based questions.
Interesting.
That tie into the things they care about and their prior learning.
Wow.
And then you co-create the learning experience with the child on their path of greatness.
Wow.
Yes. This is why I said on stage, I can fix education. I know what to do. I've just got to fix soil first so that we can, it's like.
So we're healthy enough to do it.
Yeah, so we're healthy enough to really benefit, right? But no, I'm going to do it. I'm going to write a book where James is reacting to each chapter, and I won't edit his stuff for content. I'll edit for, grammar and stuff, but we're going to release it together, and it will be one of the books I release on it. I'm going to have what we need to do and why we need to do it as a book. And then we'll have what I did and how he reacts to what we did. So I really became an educator. I was teaching teachers how to not use homework because authentic learning.
100%.
We don't need it. It's also you're paid to do your job within the time you're allotted.
Yep.
And if you can't do that job within the time that you're given, guess what? You're not qualified for that job.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so teachers
Seems
either
obvious.
loved me or hated me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I made good friends and good enemies. And when one of those good friends that was protecting me from above was my principal, retired, the board of trustees and the superintendent, all of them were all right.
Let's get rid of this.
Bye-bye. Let's quiet this guy down. And so I retired. I was head of the English department, and I retired. But like, what happened first before I retired was I wrote the Permaculture Student 2, and it pulled me out. It showed me I could make money with writing and curriculum and service and all these things that I love all at once. And I was like, this is wild. And I saw Jeff Lawton, with it's $1,000 course. There's 650 of us.
Yeah.
That's amazing what you just did there. And, he had a team, but amazing. And then you see the examples of people like Tim Ferriss, Brendan Burchard, Jeff Walker. You begin to realize that like this, $82 billion like industry of online education is dying for actually qualified teachers. And so I just realized like I could make actual curriculum and it will be like nothing anyone's seen in permaculture. And I did it. And then I went deeper and started looking for real examples that I could link to published scientific literature and commercial operations doing it and that were profitable. And so that through line was my alignment. So those were my standards. So I had to be able to find it so I could explain why. But I had to be able to show it so I could show how on the macro scale and then show that it was profitable. Because why else would they do it?
Yeah, right.
And so that was my through line of analysis. And that was what I kept me tight on what value would be passed on. And so when I wrote this book, it was the case that this is my 23rd book. Our 23rd publication, right? Some of my books have second editions, but only a couple. So, and then there's like 6 translations of the Permaculture Student 1 that mix too. But I did those. And I did work with some translators, but nice. I had to fix those translations. It's amazing how once you learn a Romance language and you can read, you can actually be like, wait a second, that's not what I said. And they're like, oh, well, I'm like, the right word is, hold on. The right word's that word. You can Google Translate anyway. Yeah. So I had to really work hard on those. So those are also a gift though. Those are I sell them for like $9. You know what I mean? Because it's like I want to be able to spread that information because it's thinking that will radically change everything. And so much of it is clarity. So much of it is just like making that alignment between, well, it's real, and this is why from the research that we can see and verify across several studies or decades of studies, you know what I mean? As much as we can get, right? We want it all if we can. And so I just started getting more and more gritty and just started asking harder and harder questions. And that alignment of what's pragmatic, because that's what that is. It's provable. We see it in the science, and it's pragmatic. Farmers are using it to make money or save money. And I was able to just create the curriculum for soil because I knew that if I just applied the ideas of permaculture to it, that Venn diagram where I talk about the principles and the fundamental elements that are involved. And so it all breaks down into 5 aspects. And it's those 5 aspects that everything's based around. So, all right, we'll see if I can get to it. It's here. I don't need the image. It's 5 aspects. It's organic matter, it's minerals, it's plants and plant roots and photosynthesis, it's air and water, and it's biology. And so those things overlap into regenerative soil. And what do I mean by regenerative soil? How did soil get here in the first place? It had to be regenerative. It had to build up every season, life begetting life, but increasing the abundance, having overflow, that's right. Not sustainable.
Surplus, yeah.
Always surplus. Yeah. Always. There would be no, feet of topsoil in the native, Midwestern plains if this wasn't the way life worked.
Yeah, that's right.
So we really have to just honor the truth of that. And starting from there, we know that there's an appropriate amount and type and pattern of behavior for your formation and management and levels of organic matter. We know that there's going to be certain microbes that are regenerative that are literally going to come back every year. Mycorrhizal fungi in fields that don't have like a ton of sulfur thrown on them, don't have synthetic nitrogen added, do not have phosphates being added. Those and herbicides and insecticides and pesticides, those things also inhibit this and kill it. That will come back every single year because otherwise it wouldn't be here. The only reason it's lasted millions and millions of years, potentially billions, is it's regenerative. Just like rhizobia. Rhizobia will pass through a compost. Rhizobia will pass through a goat, pass through a horse. You know what I mean? It stays. And farmers know that. Farmers know that because their grandfathers would add like it to the legumes and it would nodulate and then they only need to do it once. But right now there's all these people doing all these practices and they're having to re-inoculate mycorrhizal fungi all the time because of there's either a hangover momentum from bad practices. So there's still phosphate glommed on the organic matter in little stubby crystals that aren't very pretty, or there's something else inhibiting. You got like an anaerobic layer, hard pan, caustic layer. So there's always something. There's always a reason, but it links back to those 5 aspects every single time, and you can test each of them individually and diagnose them individually, and then find coherence with them. And I was able to link the chemistry and the biology, the minerals. Because that's the thing is it's like minerals aren't a bad word to people. You say chemistry, they're like, excuse you. They're like, that is evil. Better living through chemistry. And it's like, well, chemistry is a language for explaining the natural world. And
the periodic table of elements.
Right.
Is a language.
And so I had the stigma. I hated my chemistry teacher. She made fun of my stutter. And I may have insulted her so bad that I turned red too. But I couldn't. She was making fun of my stutter, and I had like Tourette's moment. And I just no. She was a first-year teacher. She had a lot to learn. It's okay. I'm sorry, but she should be sorry. So I it was the worst education I'd ever gotten in science, and so, but that's what most people got.
That's what I got.
And not only that, who created the curriculum? It's not her fault. She's just following a book. But also, just don't make fun of the kid who stutters.
But it's all made. But it's all made without reason. So
exactly, because there's no pragmatic aspect. They never actually apply it to their lives.
That's right. The ones who are writing it and the ones who are lecturing on it aren't the ones who are using it.
But I think that's actually purposeful. I think I am a person that my vice principal gave me "Dumbing Us Down" by John Taylor Gatto. He told me to read it before I went live in the classroom solo. That book explains how, quite purposely, 80% of the population is not educated fully on purpose. They're given a truncated version of math, a truncated version. And in fact, if you travel around long enough, you realize, there are some high schools that are being taught middle school. And there are some high schools that are being taught college. And then you go to some colleges and they're teaching high school. You go to other colleges and they are expecting you to already have done the equivalent of college. And so there's this 3-tiered, and we all know that there was 3 tiers in elementary school if you grew up at a certain era, right? There was like the lower kids, there were the average kids, and then there was the gifted, gate children. So interesting. Bill Gates. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, that's
so interesting.
I thought you were going to say Rockefeller.
Yeah.
That's funny. No, but
on Dumbing Us Down.
Yeah. And so all of that education is designed in a particular way to disempower, to break down. I mean, Common Core, literally, I refuse to do Common Core.
Yeah.
Like on principle. Like literally, this is part of the reason I got in trouble. I would speak out against Common Core and say, I'm better than Common Core. I teach kids better because I teach critical thinking.
Yeah.
And Common Core literally removed Bloom's taxonomy and then they created this hobbled version of it that only the first 4 layers.
Doesn't even make sense.
So you actually don't allow kids to to complete their understanding in order to develop a fluency that deals with novel application, creative application, and real application. Because if you don't do those 3 things, you don't actually allow for that child or adult even to actually think improvisationally and to create something new or challenge it.
Exactly. Yeah.
So there's a reason they educate us this way. And so there's a reason I defy that. And so I still teach this way to this day. And so
That laugh was epic, by the way. Thank you. That was perfect.
It's true, though.
It is.
We're all here because we defy that idea of we're going to control you, limit what your potential is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's not how we were created.
Yeah. And it's a generational like thing now. Like our generation that has gone through this is like, no,
Yes.
we're done.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's so many of us are homeschooling, and we know it down to our bones when we teach our children to read ourselves, and we have that sweetness. That there's such a blessing of that when you teach your child to read. It's because your parents probably taught you to read, or our ancestors definitely taught their kids to read, right? And so there's a sweetness to that, but there's also a relationship to that, but there's also like a power to that. You're like, no, I can teach my kid things. Not only that, I know my kid's gifted, and he knows he's gifted, and because they're in the mirror neuron stage, so they can feel that they feel your pride in their learning so much deeper than they could ever feel it from a teacher. And so the feedback loop between that is so powerful. We know at the moment we do it. And we let go of the anxiety of being a teacher, because so many people have anxiety of being a teacher, but we're born to be that parent. You know, in my opinion, we're born to be that parent to that specific child. That's my belief. I believe that children are gifts from God. And as a parent, you quickly figure out that they are not you.
Yeah.
You're gifted with this individual that has a will.
Yeah, that's right.
Even inside the womb, you're like, what are you doing? Why are you kicking and stretching this weird way? Yeah. You know, like they are individuals, and they have spunk, and they've got personality, and it shows up immediately.
Well, and they're given to you as a gift. You know, we think it's just like I've been reading this good book about marriage, and it's, you know, the false idea that your spouse is there to complete you, to make your life better,
That's toxic. The thing is, cleave unto each other is so critically important, because when you make decisions, you want to be unified with your spouse. But you need to take care of yourself so that you are prepared for what your spouse needs you to be. It's not like you're like serving you should serve your spouse. Yeah. Your spouse should serve you. But it's more than that. It's you doing your work on yourself with God that allows you to then show up as the full and complete self that is that has those gaps that person can't fill.
Then we can rely on each other for that as a strength, not just to
That's what Unstoppable Enthusiasm was. My book, Unstoppable Enthusiasm, literally was about
transform me. We transform each other.
Right. And that's what enthusiasm is. It's in theos. It's God within.
But kids are the same, I think. I think God, he knows what we need to complete us, to grow us. And oftentimes that's through, I mean, you're talking about the challenging times that have cultivated and culminated what we see as success, and is success ultimately, production and fruitfulness. But it's service. But our kids are that, our spouses are that. They're divinely inspired challenges and like they equally relieve the burden from us, and not create a burden, but they're part of the refining process. And I mean, I
think there's scriptural examples of children and parents at different times being burdens.
Yeah,
and we carry each other at times, right?
Yeah. But if you don't get the chance to do that, the richness, the fullness of life and relationship, they don't exist.
Right. And just like, you know, I mean, that's the truth about marriage is like, it's like you actually have to go through those hard times where you doubt and question and you get frustrated and you feel like you've grown and they've grown in different directions. But it's that it is that renewal of that cleave unto each other, of that vow.
The covenant, the commitment.
Because you will have differing opinions, and you're supposed to. Yeah. So I really value all of that. I value where we are with education, where we're heading with education. I really value that we're heading into a place of more acceptance finally. And I think that we're going to be able to also help public school kids, like I was talking about earlier, by making it an unschooling environment.
But I love what you said. I mean, what probably stood out to me the most, and I think I see that in, at least in what I'm familiar with in your authorship, is the menued approach. I love that. When you said that, I'm like, oh my goodness, that's what's been missing. All right, let's wrap this up.
Okay. So my final thought is that this is not a representation of like Matt Power's thoughts. And like I've got some moments where I have make some connections, and that's good. But really, this is me creating, with all my training and my experience, a clear picture frame and window into what nature's actually doing. And the reason that it arrives on us and it clicks because we're recognizing a pattern or a cycle or a system or behavior in nature that we've either seen before, is congruent with our framework of understanding and experience, or it fits in logically. And that's the only way that you have that epiphany. And it's not me that's doing it. It's me arranging it, and so that nature can do it. And once we start learning from nature, it starts this lifelong learning experience that just iterates out. And this book's a touchstone to begin that observation, that relationship, and that feedback.
Awesome.
That's awesome. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
To be continued.
Cool. Yes.
All right. Thanks. Thanks so much for joining us as we expand our paradigms and explore what's possible in the realm of regen agronomy. If you would like to contact us or learn more about what we do, please visit our website at www.soilcraft.com, as well as our YouTube channel. If you have topics you would like us to unpack or stories, please connect with us so that we can share them with others.